Developing a capital improvement plan for a local agency. This is going to be a case study of some work that I've done just recently to develop a capital improvement plan specifically for bridges for a local agency. A little overview, we're going to go through the BCIP objectives, what were we trying to do, what are the plan limitations, how we prioritize some projects and the project groupings. As I mentioned, Yamhill County is a county in Oregon. They're actually nearby the office I work out there in Salem. They were able to be our guinea pigs on this. Just on my soapbox here, just real quick, you don't really get rich as a consultant developing capital improvement plans, right? But for a lot of our bridge owners out here that are DOTs, you guys probably have a pretty robust programming unit that is taking care of all this, and so it's probably not something that you're thinking of a lot. But if you put yourself in those local agency shoes, a lot of times they're an army of one, or maybe they don't even have a single engineer on staff, and they're having to still manage all these assets. And local agencies own half of all the bridges in the country. I felt really fortunate to be able to be part of this, and that Yamhill County trusted us to be able to help them with this. And kind of the way it came from is they were looking around they said, we gotta fix our bridges, and they weren't sure where to start. And they kind of reached out on, hey, can you give us an estimate to paint this bridge? And I looked at that bridge and I said, I don't really think you should paint that bridge. To be honest, I can give you an estimate, but I would prefer not to. Can we talk about your project selection process? And that ended up how we kind of worked through it and said, okay, well, let's see if we can't get a plan pulled together. And so for a lot of the DOTs out here that have robust processes, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local agencies, consultant peers. This is kind of I see it as a really needed resource for a lot of the locals across the country. And I use locals broadly. I know that there's some local agencies that rival DOTs, and that there's some that are relatively small and they run the whole gamut in between. So I'm not trying to pigeonhole that all local agencies need this kind of assistance. But I do see it as something that's certainly folks in this partnership could be helping with. A capital improvement plan should be flowing out of your asset management plan. In this situation, we didn't have an asset management plan that dialed in with their bridge program. They should be in alignment with each other. And so this is actually out of the FHWA Bridge Preservation Guide. I probably reference this guide more than anybody. I got pictures throughout here. Hopefully I got references on most of them. But I mean, it's a really good guide. It was put out in 2018. Unlike most guides that are like this, it's like that, right? It's really easy to read, gives you a lot of clear actions that you can run with, and it's very useful. But they define an asset management plan in there, and I've kind of paraphrased it a little bit, but it's a strategic and systematic process of operating, maintaining, and improving physical assets, right? That's a good way to go. You're gonna focus on both engineering and economic analysis based on quality information. Well, we're really fortunate in this country. We got a lot of really good quality bridge information, both on the local and on the state side, through the bridge inspection programs that are out there. A lot of this data is already readily available to us. You just need to have the skill set to be able to process it. Identify a structured sequence of maintenance, preservation, repair, rehabilitation, and replacement actions, right? You gotta have a balance between those, and I'll hit on that a few times. And the goal is to achieve and sustain a desired state of good repair at a minimum practical cost, right? We can all get behind that. I haven't heard anybody that said, I have too much money. How do I get rid of it, right? And if you do, I'll see you later. Let me know, I could use that. So here's the legs of an asset management plan. You got your preservation, preventative maintenance, your rehabilitation, and your replacements. Now, I know in this room, we really like to focus on the green one. In fact, we've even color-coded it in the good color of green at the top, and red, replacements, is the bad color. And then underneath the good color of green, we have the cyclical maintenance, and we have the condition-based maintenance. What I'm gonna say is, as we develop these capital improvement plans, you can't just spend all of your money on preservation, and you can't spend all your money on replacements. And there's not a magic formula to tell you how to balance between the two, right? You gotta be able to look at the inventory and say, what are the inventory needs, and then how do I spread the funds out? From there, we went and said, okay, what's the objectives? What are we trying to get through here? And so we worked through with the county on this one and said, okay, we want to identify and address these highest risks of the inventory, right? This is an inventory that was a little bit neglected or had a lot of deferred maintenance for a while, and so there was some substantial or some significant risks that we wanted to get down in the near term. We wanted to identify which bridges really should we stop spending money on, right? These are the ones that, boy, I could go and fix it, but there's still another 30 things wrong with it, and I'd just really like to see it go. And maybe we need to try and defer it for that replacement. How are we gonna prioritize these projects for delivery? The purpose of this plan is to give you that long-term funding strategy, right? You're not looking at what can I do next in the 6 months, you're looking 5 years ahead, right? It starts to give you that that longer range outlook. You have to have a plan that aligns with your available resources. And so obviously this changes with every local agency or every bridge owner that's out there, right? You gotta have if you have a plan that says you need $50 million to enact this plan and you have $5 million, you have $45 million worth of plan that's worthless. And so you gotta align with your resources. The county that we're referencing here as part of this case study is, they stepped up. Like, I was really impressed. Like, this is not the biggest county. And they said, we're putting $2 million a year into this of county funds, right? Like, we're serious. We want to get this inventory under control. They asked us to help develop this plan, so it's roughly $10 million total, and it needs to run for 5 years, so through 23 through 27. They have an in-house maintenance forces, not dedicated bridge crew, but they have in-house forces that do have a lot of skill sets, technical skills with bridge maintenance and repair, and they said, so we want to know what should we prioritize their work for, and what should we send out for contract. They own all their bridges, right? So they don't care if it's NBI or non-NBI. They need them all included, and so we included all 134 of them. My background was coming from Oregon DOT and running our bridge maintenance program. I knew that inventory really well, and so when they first made this request, I was like, oh yeah, it's like a spreadsheet. I used to do this all the time. Like, totally knock this out, it's super easy. I don't know anything about Yamhill County's inventory. Even though I've worked in Yamhill County, I worked on state bridges in Yamhill County. And so the first thing we had to do is spend a lot of time becoming familiar with their county, right, and their bridge inventory. Like, how am I gonna give you recommendations if I have no idea what you own? Ports and spreadsheets and photos was a big part of dedication there for a little while. We looked at historical trends, what's been happening over time. It's not like an FHWA spokesperson here, but the InfoBridge website from FHWA is also a fantastic resource. It holds historical trend data. It's available to anybody. If you've never heard of it, let me know. I'll give you a little demonstration. Again, I'm not sponsored by FHWA, but they have a couple really cool tools out there that you can use. And so anybody can pull this up, and I did for Yamhill County, and you can see they're like a lot of the country, right? If you go back 20 years, they had a lot of good bridges and even a number of fair bridges and not a lot of poor bridges. And then over the last 20 years, the good bridges went like this, and the poor bridges, or the fair bridges went like this, right? And that's just what happens with a lot of population if you're not either maintaining and doing preservation or having a sustainable replacement plan. So I said, okay, well, let's take a look at bridges by decade, right? If you have a lot of poor or fair and poor bridges and they're all fairly new, then you have a really big problem with your maintenance, probably design and construction, but that wasn't the case here. They just have a lot of old bridges. This shows the number of bridges by decade. So you can see that big hump there in the 50s, 60s, and 70s where they built a lot of their inventory during that time. And it's at that point where it needs a lot of work to keep it in service. Zoomed in on those 50s, 60s, and 70 bridges and threw in the NBI general condition data for that as well. And so again, not really surprising. You got a real big peaks of the 5s, bridges that are considered in fair condition but are on the cusp of going down into poor condition. And then you have a lot of bridges in poor condition as well. We went through and started reviewing that, so that was kind of at the high level, right? Let's take a look at your whole inventory, but then you got to get down into the individual bridges as well. And so we took that next step and started looking at inspection reports, right? And looking for those defects, timber boring diagrams. I have a lot of timber in the county. Maintenance recommendations. I don't hear maintenance recommendations referred to a lot when developing asset management plans and capital improvement plans, but the inspectors go out and they provide a great amount of information when they develop these maintenance recommendations and give you a really good head start on some of these plans at some isolated repairs. I was a little surprised at the volume. So, there's 613 total maintenance recommendations. And so I was not really looking to go through all 613 of them. And so we said, let's try and bracket this. And what we said is, okay, let's look at these really critical ones. So you got critical maintenance recommendations, you have urgents, and then in Oregon, we break out routine into routine high, medium, and then just routine. And the purpose of that is to give you the end user of all that inspection data a little bit more granularity into what's going on in that routine inventory. You can see that dropped it to 190-ish maintenance recs. That was a little more manageable. We said, okay, we'll go through those ones line by line. Kind of an idea of what the bridge inventory looks like here is it's diverse. They have lots of different kinds of bridges. This picture is actually just really cool, so I wanted to show it. It is one of their bridges. It has the timber logs for the girders on it and then timber decking on it. This was part of our capital improvement plan, so it was a bridge included. It is not the most common bridge type in the county, right? I was gonna show the most common bridge type and I was like, that's a really boring picture. This one's way cooler. So that's what we did. But the most common bridge type is precast concrete slabs. on top of timber pile trestles with an asphalt-wearing surface, no waterproofing membrane. That was the bread and butter. Typically, the slabs have held up relatively well over time, and this timber substructure has not. So that was kind of the bulk of it, and so we said, okay, well, I got 191 maintenance recommendations. I got all these different objectives of this plan. Like, I'm still not down to a level of granularity where we can really pull together a tangible plan for them to take action on. So we said, we need another ranking system to delineate between those 191 maintenance recs into a different kind of categorization. And so we went through that, assigned them a different risk-based kind of approach. So, you know, if you have a whole bunch of urgent or critical maintenance recs, like how do you delineate between which ones are the most critical versus the ones that are less critical? And so we went through that. This is a ranking relative to their population, right? And so it's meant to kind of help rank between them. So like a 1 doesn't mean it's not urgent or critical, you don't need to do it at all. It's that it's lower end of that particular population. And so you can tell as I'm leading into this, a lot of engineering judgment went into this. Supplemental ranking was from a 1 to a 5. 5 was like, you know, this is probably an immediate risk to public safety. It's not just like a localized hazard. It could warrant a load posting. It could warrant something that needs to happen right away. All the way down to a 1, which is not an immediate risk. A lot of these are like lack of inspection access. So, you know, there could have been an issue there, but you couldn't see it because it was behind a bunch of blackberries. And so it was like, well, yes, I agree with the inspector's recommendations. You need to clear that out. But it wasn't like an immediate risk as far as that relative scale goes. So we went through and sorted through those. You can see I went from 191 to 194. If anyone's paying attention to the numbers, I just added a few as we went through there. But so we separated those out again, right? And so now we're starting to get into a little more granularity. We got some ideas of, okay, these are the 16 that are like, okay, we want those done right away, as fast as you can. And then we got these 25, 24, and others that we can start working into this plan. You know, what does a 5 look like? So this is a spread footing that has scoured out and started to have some actual signs of distress. And so you have this this footing here. It's got these big diagonal shear cracks going here. The kind of the picture on the right shows the underneath it where you can put it all the way underneath. You guys saw the previous presentation. I'm becoming more sensitive to scour issues lately. And so that would be an example of a 5. Some other examples of that would be if you had like multiple piles in a row that were really in bad condition, right? Not just one, you have less of ability to redistribute load. A 3 might be more of like you have a substandard traffic safety device. So you got like a timber post behind a railing that's starting to fail, or you have a timber pile that's rotted pretty good, but not next to another pile that's rotted pretty bad as well. And then you get down to those lower risks like I talked about. So we got all those different rankings. I got a ton of data. I got a lot of spreadsheets going. Like I got to start getting into something that's actually useful. And so we said, okay, let's go in and start grouping some projects here. There's 194 now repairs that we're looking at taking place in addition to some other like global preservation kind of stuff that we're looking at. And so we said, you got to bundle these together, right? You got to start making them into larger projects. You can't go out and contract one rail post repair. You got to contract 40 of them. Then that makes more sense, right? You got to get some efficiency. So we started bundling projects together by their risk and making them larger projects so that you can get efficiency in both the design and in the construction bids. Bundle repairs of a similar priority, right? If I got a bunch of 5s that I need to get out the door right away, put those 5s together of a similar type of work and trying to address those as soon as possible. And then identify bridges for replacement, and then I assess the risk of deferred maintenance on that, right? So if I got a bunch of bridges that I want to really replace the next 5 years, I really want to take a hard look at whether or not we actually do some of these repairs or not. Bridge replacements. Again, this isn't a bridge replacement conference, but they're an important part of this. We recommended 5 bridges for replacements, and a lot of what drove this was taking a look at what would it take to fix this bridge and keep it in service. You know, there's certainly traffic volume played into it, and traffic volume was probably the largest factor in it because all the other bridges had similar other parameters you might use for replacements. The maintenance recs, right? So there was like 49 maintenance recommendations on these bridges, 29 of which were very high priority. And so not only were doing some of these repairs expensive, widespread across the bridge, but you probably wouldn't end up with a great bridge when you were done with it anyways. So we said, these are the ones we want you to try and focus on replacement. This is a picture of one where you can see there have been repairs on this bridge before. The actual approaches are starting to lean inward. And so to rebuild it, you'd have to pull off the slabs, rebuild the approaches, rebuild the substructure, and then put the slabs back down. So at that point, you've invested in a new bridge, right? So we said, let's replace it. Other ones that were worth replacement are when you just have widespread defects. This is a big timber bridge. All these little X's indicate locations of rot in the decking. If you go underneath the bridge, there's a whole lot of X's down there too, right? And so it would be a lot of work. It's not that you can't maintain and keep this bridge in your inventory. It's that you're gonna divert a lot of your resources to do so. So let's put it on that list for replacement. Deck preservation, certainly as part of this capital improvement plan, we said, well, you also wanna try and get ahead of the curve, right? You wanna start doing work that needs to take place, and you want to include preservation as part of that work. And so there's a lot of side-by-side slabs in the county. You can see on the underside here a bunch of staining coming through those slabs from leaking deck surface. There were no membranes kind of more or less throughout the county. And so we said, okay, well, this one needs to be repave it and put in a waterproofing membrane. Let's see if we can't seal that up. It's gonna protect the slabs, it's gonna protect the substructure, it's gonna extend the life. It was funny listening to the previous presentation talking about I can't find a bare deck. I was like, well, a lot of counties don't have bare decks, they use a lot of asphalt. And so I also had trouble finding bare decks. I had assumed that I would be able to cherry pick a whole lot of deck sealing of concrete decks very early in the plan development, right? I mean, no one argues with sealing cracked concrete decks. It's very inexpensive. It's a good life extension of it. And so, and it's easy to contract, right? I mean, the plans for it is just show the deck and you're done. It's easy. There were hardly any, but there were a couple. We found them and found the ones that were worth actually installing some epoxy overlays on these ones. Here'd be a candidate for the epoxy overlay. You got this very high value bridge there on the right. It's in relatively good condition. It doesn't have scour issue. It meets current traffic needs. Let's extend the life of this. Seal preservation. So again, thinking in my old hat, I said, boy, I can easily find some steel preservation to include in this project. Again, kind of cherry picking some easy big dollar value items that I could throw into this capital improvement plan. We went through it and looked at these. And so the picture on the left is a pony truss. It's got some serious deterioration. So it not only does it need painting, but a lot of steel rehab, but it goes to a dead end road. And so there's almost zero traffic volume on it. Right? And so we looked at that and said, I don't think that's a candidate for preservation, right? I think you need to look harder if that bridge even has to remain in the inventory. And then the bridge on the right, we got steel girders underneath that thing. Would anyone want to paint that bridge? Right? It doesn't make any sense. You just pull it off and put in a new bridge. It's very small. The cost of painting it outweighs the cost of it. And so when it all came down to it, we had to come back to the county and say, I know we were supposed to flag bridges for steel preservation. We didn't find ones that made sense. Now, they do have some bridges that make sense to do steel preservation. They have just been painted fairly recently, and so they don't need to be repainted in 5 years. So we did flag those and hand those on. We felt better about that, but we just came up short. I'd mentioned before scour repairs. Scour repairs were a really big part of this capital improvement plan. There's 24 scour repairs recommended. Put them into 5 bundles, $2.3 million. It's 23% of the overall plan. Timber repairs and preservation, some of those most significant repairs I talked about were the timber. And the crew was actually really comfortable replacing timber and had the technical skills to do it. So we actually carved off a lot of the highest priority repairs and said, have the crew do it. They actually weren't included in the capital improvement plan because they had their separate crew funding for that. So we carved those off, put all the other ones into bundles. I wanted to get the preservation on here. Timber you can extend the life of timber quite a bit if you put in these little borate rods. So I got credit to Chris Keegan on this photo. I stole it from your presentation. It's on the TSP2 website, so I figured it'd be okay. This is what it looks like kind of when it was done. Of course, there was a report that was written up to give context, but you have all these different project bundles. They kind of range in that $300 to $500-ish thousand range so that they're manageable inside to fit in with a $2 million total contract for a year, and big enough to get a contractor interested enough to give you a bid that is hopefully reasonable. Once all this goes through, 121 of these really high priority maintenance recommendations will be taken off the books. And so if you think as an owner, you've addressed an awful lot of your risk on your inventory by doing this. And a lot of this is preservation work, right? You're extending the life of the bridge, you're taking care of high risk defects, you're performing scour repairs. Add in the replacements, add in the preservation rehab projects, you end up to about a $10.1 million total and about $2 million a year, right? Actually landing right on $2 million is kind of hard. I didn't want to do it because the level of detail in our estimates aren't quite that refined. So, and then monitor and replace. We had a section there to remind them this is a very dynamic, right? This is a 5-year plan, but after 2 years, it probably needs to be updated and rethought of, right? Things change quickly. In fact, as we were writing this up, we gave a draft list to the bridge crew. They knocked out 10 repairs right away. right? They were excited, they were ready to get going. It was fantastic. The inspectors found 10 more repairs to replace it before I was done with the plan either. So like, it was one of those, I'm like, all right, I gotta get this turned in really quick or I'm gonna it's never gonna end. So just kind of a quick summary on it. You know, we developed a 5-year plan, $2 million annual cost. We did break out PE and CN. We were shooting for that balanced approach. And at all cases, we want to avoid worst first. Actually, I asked worst first replacements. I actually asked the county, I'm like, well, if you want me to just identify replacements, I could just list off, 7 big bridge replacement projects, and that's the entire plan, and my work's done. But I suggested, balancing it would work well. They were fantastic to work with. Greg Hafner and Mark Alago with the county gave permission to give this presentation here today, and they were just great to work with. So, does anyone have any questions?
Mentioned bundling within the county. I'm curious, we're trying to promote bundling external county to county. Have you or any other agencies been able to accomplish that?
So getting an IGA together and having multiple counties work together on their resources, that's a fantastic idea. I am unaware of that. It's certainly something we can take up with the local agency working group, because you get a lot of efficiency with it, right? You turn that $300,000 project into a $3 million project, you get a lot of good bids.
One comment on that, we're trying to do that in California, not successful as of yet, but Kansas apparently has a real good model where they, FHWA has a guide on it, and they basically sponsor. It's like a lottery. They have to put the projects together and then they fund the projects. So I thought it was a great concept.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.